Let's dive into a little bit of regulation updates today. We'll get in a little deeper, get into not only stablecoin bills, but also a little bit about the FIT bill and kind of give you guys at least an insight to what's happening in DC. My name is Paul Barrow. Welcome back into TechPath. Joining me today, of course, is Ron Hammond, who's been a frequent attendee here, Director of Government Affairs over at the Blockchain Association. So great to have you back.
Always great to be on, Paul. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me again.
So Ron, let's get into stablecoins. Appears to be a lot of activity, but maybe not. I'm not sure how to read this, so I wanted to get you on the show to give us a little bit more of the pulse of DC. Can you kind of give us a rundown of what's going on with stablecoins right now?
Yeah, sure thing. Actually, I literally just ran back from the hill, so apologies if there's a little sweat on me here. It's a little hot here in DC, but overall, you're right. There is a lot of noise here in this space. There is progress. The thing is that right now we have a bill that passed the House Financial Service Committee in July 2023. Now, what's notable, though, is that Maxine Waters actually is not in support of that bill, or she didn't vote in support of it. Right. There were a couple of hang-ups allegedly over the things like state pathway and such. But at the end of the day, McHenry still able to bring her along. This was her effort where it started with the Facebook Libra situation. And now they have Chuck Schumer involved, who is the #1 man in the Senate. This is a man that can move a lot of pieces of legislation. And if you have him in your back, he can really make things happen. But there's one other issue. On top of all the other stablecoin, talking right now, you have to look at the other bills that they're talking to pair it with, which just so happens to be the other bill I worked heavily on when I was working on Congress. I worked on crypto regulation as well as marijuana banking. And that bill itself is also being a priority. And that bill carries a vast amount of political landmines. McConnell, for example, he said yesterday that he was not going to support marijuana banking in whatsoever. So it's not even a stablecoin bill that's going to potentially be the downfall of this rumor package when it eventually does come out, if it does come out, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But there's also the other bill it's attached to. And it is kind of crazy. For a lot of folks in crypto space, they say, hey, why is Congress not acting here? You have to, in the banking for marijuana banking, again, it's just talking about banks or marijuana companies being able to bank at, giant G-SIBs and such. That bill has passed the House 4 times at least. It's been 13 years. And they still can't get it over the finish line. And that's a simple thing. So when we look at, crypto regulation, we've been here for about 7 years. For stablecoins, about 3 or 4 now. So I'm just letting folks know there's a lot that can have in legislation, but at the same time, even things that make pretty much sense to most Americans, it does take a long time to get through Congress. So this is the reality we're in.
Who are the key lawmakers right now that we have to keep an eye on? Obviously, we know McHenry is pretty much one of the champions, obviously with Maxine Waters on kind of, I guess, as the counter position, but you mentioned Schumer. Who else there in Capitol Hill do we need to watch for?
So the other two that are really important to have the, quote, 4-corner sign-off, this is the chairs of the relative committees here. So it's House Financial Services and the Senate Banking Committee. So for the Senate Banking Committee, that's Tim Scott, the Republican, and you have Sherrod Brown, the Democrat. And if you recall, 2 years ago, Sherrod Brown and Pat Toomey were the ones that were working on a stablecoin bill. Right. And it was actually Brown that didn't get that to go forward. And Brown has been an opponent of the industry for quite some time. But the one thing I will say is that he did say on Tuesday that he is open to the idea of stablecoin legislation. And since he is the chair of the committee, so he's the one in control, as opposed to the Republican, that does carry some weight here. But, we have a lot of other forces in play. Again, the White House has been involved in the House bill. They were allegedly, getting with Democrats right before the bill was to a vote in July to get a couple off. So we got keeping the White House in play. We also have to look at the Fed, Treasury, allegedly according to Maxine Waters, they have been in the room as well. So that's a lot of parties. And each party does have their own red line to say. So it's almost impossible to have a scenario where everyone's happy. So how do you, square that, the peg there with the round hole? It's tough. So, but we'll see. McHenry is an operator, and he does want to get things done before he retires.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is we're dealing with some timelines here, obviously going into the next election. But even if we do see a change in the White House, how much of a shift would we see, at least on the perception of what the White House and the administration has in comparison, especially to the stablecoin bill? Do you feel like a shift would possibly be a good thing or a bad thing for this particular legislation?
You know, the when it comes to at least a potential Trump administration, he really hasn't said anything on stablecoins. You know, we do see this happening a little bit in politics, especially on the right, where they conflate stablecoins with CBDCs, and they're all they know is they're opposed to CBDCs. So we'll work on that education. I think we'll get there. But overall, you know, you have to remember it was actually the Democrats, it was the Biden administration that called for stablecoin regulation. That was in 2021 December, and so we still haven't got to the finish line. And as we can tell, there's a lot of views on stablecoins, even within the Biden administration, where you have the SEC trying to say they're securities for the case like Paxos. But we also have, you know, the Fed and Treasury saying, no, this is more in our jurisdiction. And then the CFTC saying they're commodities in some cases. And so it does really kind of leave it to Congress here. But all these regulators within the Biden administration are definitely weighing in, and they do carry a lot of weight. So there's a lot of factors here. But I am saying optimistic because the power players are talking. They are moving or talking to the person that can move a bill through Congress. And right now, you know, folks are talking about the FAA reauthorization. That's kind of what Congress is going through right now. I believe the Senate just voted on it. And that doesn't seem to be a vehicle. It was slim chance, even from the get-go. But there's going to be other chances. And we also have to look after the election, too. After the election, a lot of folks prefer to do different things.
Well, that's the thing. You really don't understand what could shift, at least in the landscape of crypto regulation, especially if we do see a new administration. When you look at what some of the states are doing, Wyoming, of course, moving quickly on stablecoin, possibly getting a launch. Do you feel like Wyoming might actually pull this off before Congress gets to a point where we get a bill signed by Biden?
It seems like that way. I mean, the states are been leading the way in crypto for a number of years, but Wyoming for a lot of space as well. But also look at, you know, states like New York have a stablecoin regime already in place. And again, it's a little behind what happening over in Wyoming and what they're trying to pose recently. But at the same time, the state pathway is really crucial. And that is a red line, especially for McHenry. That is something that has to stay in. And the Fed's coming in saying, look, this is all of our jurisdiction. And that's a pretty big philosophical shift here. And so they have to find a way to meet in the middle. Columbus Gillibrand, they proposed their stablecoin and kind of a bill as more of a middle-of-the-road approach of sorts. You know, it does favor more banks, especially, but we do see in the case of the state pathway, there is a middle ground of sorts there. Where if you're issuing below 10 billion, you go through the state. If you go above that, you're going more to the federal. You know, it's got a mixed perception from the folks I'm talking to within the industry and on Capitol Hill. But you know, again, it's kind of like there's got to be some other options out there to try to find a way forward. So. But those talks are happening, and that is really crucial because those don't happen often. So, especially when it's crypto, we really haven't had that conversation before.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the FIT bill. This is the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act. The timeline for that. What does that look like, and who is in front of that bill potentially going forward?
So right now, that bill, same with the stablecoin bill, it passed out of the Finance Service Committee with actually 6 Democrats and all the Republicans back in July. And it had the entire support, Republican and Democrat, from the House Ag Committee. So you actually got a pretty decent amount of Congress has weighed in. But now we have the House floor vote. It seems pretty likely, from what I'm hearing recently, that we'll probably see that bill coming to the House floor probably within the next month or two. I'd say probably before the end, for sure. But it seems like this is the time. Now, I want to stress... We were in this situation almost a year ago, and then the House vacated the speaker, and then McHenry became speaker, and we lost about 3 months. We might be having that happen next week.
Again.
Pulls that card. The Democrats seem to pose that can change, but I'm just warning folks, we could see FIT coming up, but we could also see a really standstill Congress again if something were to happen.
What do you think is the likelihood of Johnson getting ousted?
It doesn't seem like it's going to happen. I think there is, you know, a growing amount of Republicans who are frustrated with Johnson. A lot of them want to get their conservative priorities or other priorities in the way. The Ukraine vote was a big, slap in the face for some conservatives. But at the same time, a lot of Democrats and a lot of folks on the Republican side are giving Johnson credit. That was a really tough bill. A lot of folks here in D.C. did not see that happening. And so he was able to make it happen.
Interesting.
But it is season. Everyone starts to do these antics, and it's only going to get worse. And the Democrats don't come in and save Johnson. It's a 1-vote majority. Like, we could be in a situation we have no speaker. So it could be a real mess, and then all the crypto bills fall to the wayside.
Yeah, that would be, I think, a little bit of, that's so weird that Democrats would be the saving grace, which is really what it was, you know, when you look at the last situation that we ran into. Let's go into the SEC a little bit. SEC court sanction. You look at actual change in the SEC strategy. Do you feel like there's any potential movement now with all these losses behind the SEC, the continued pressure from the courts themselves? Is there any change on Gensler? Do you guys feel like, hey, it's kind of, hey, he's just going to keep on his marching orders with Elizabeth Warren and keep tracking?
I will say there's just a lot of missteps been happening more recently at the SEC, both on the political strategy side, but also within, of course, the legal side with the debt bot case. That's really going to ruffle some feathers, again, with Democrats. I'm hearing that a lot more recently. The debt bot case, the Republicans are jumping on that heavily. And the consensus situation, the Ethereum situation, like that also is spurring a lot of the drive for why we need the FIT 21 Act, why we need to have legislation when it comes to stablecoins. Like Congress is using the L's, or at least the media hype that the SEC was going to hopefully, or planning to have, and actually converting that into reason to push the thing that the SEC hates, which is the FIT bill. And so I think that's really starting to happen. He was on Capitol Hill, for some private meetings allegedly this week. Really still holding firm to his crypto positions. Nothing's really new from what sources have said. But the last thing I'll say is it's around that time that he would likely come up in front of Congress. And I am sure McHenry is going to follow up on the Ethereum question, because now we know that actually he greenlit the investigation, the ETH, 2 weeks before he testified. Now, mind you, though, it is an active investigation, so he can technically say, I had no view, or, I couldn't say anything, but he asked for his personal views. McHenry did, and he still didn't answer. So, which obviously his personal views were, he thinks it's a security. So there's gonna be a lot of ammo there. I do think we're gonna probably see Gensler probably before end of July. I mean, I would say probably hopefully June or something to that extent. But I'd say, watch out for that. We're gonna have also the FDIC, the OCC, as well as the credit union regulator and the Fed in front of Congress May 15th. And there's been a lot of things been going on, especially with the custodian and such, that have ruffled a lot of folks here in Congress. And I'm sure that that's going to be a hot topic as crypto when it comes to those regulators.
Yeah, I was looking at this tweet by Patrick McHenry. New court filing, this goes back to what you just were mentioning. Gary Gensler knowingly misled Congress when pressed on the classification of ETH. This, of course, gets into the whole issue of, potentially looking at a subpoena. I mean, this is, I think it's getting a little bit further down the line. I mean, when you look at the landscape of how Congress is looking at the SEC, at least through their rose-colored glasses, what do you think will be next for the SEC? Do you feel like this is just going to roll out to another congressional hearing and, Gensler's going to, kind of slide by again, or what do you think is going to happen?
I definitely think we'll have Gensler in front of the committees for, a grilling, definitely. Again, from both sides of the aisle here, we've seen that it looks more likely that the Senate's going to flip Republican. And that probably means, regardless if Joe Biden wins or if Trump wins, that means he's got to get through a Republican Senate. And again, I'm hearing from Senate Democrats that they don't support Gensler. So he's losing folks a lot. I don't think Gensler's going to get renominated, regardless of who wins or loses the White House. So again, he has a 6-year term. He'll have another year into the whoever the next administration is. So this is probably his last go around. So he's going to do what he can to get his legacy out there, which seems to be regulation by enforcement here. And again, when you take a step back, and think about it, just the number of companies that have been sued by U.S. companies that have been sued by the SEC. You've got Coinbase, Kraken, Uniswap. It is everyone from every facet here, and that is going to be his legacy. And I think he's just going to keep going forward with the mantra that he's got to crack down the industry. And when they overextend, like in the case of debt box, you become the fall guy and they get cut. So this is the reality we're in. But I'm more optimistic because I'm seeing how it is affecting, and it's not just crypto, it's ESG and other fronts, but I'm seeing that really turn from the Democrat side. The Republicans were going to hate him regardless. That's usually what happens in politics. But the Democrats just they're piling on the hate train, and it's a comforting state because it's just apparent whether you're in crypto or not that this is a lot of overreach from the SEC.
Well, and I think so many people now outside of, at least in, even our business circles, they're asking these kinds of questions. This seems very excessive, which is both my attorney friends, a lot of people that are in just asset management. You look at, they're in the same boat and they don't even deal in crypto. And they're like, geez, this is getting out of hand. What's going on up there?
I mean, the last thing I'll say, I probably should point this out earlier. It is crazy to think that since 2023 in March, the SEC has been launching its investigation into Ethereum, and the CFTC has been doubling down in multiple hearings, especially hearings, saying hey, this is a commodity. They send out enforcement actions all the way down to Qcoin recently. They've been saying, eat the commodity, eat the commodity. The top two regulators who claim to have a good working relationship and they talk all the time on crypto, they hold vastly substantial different views on Ethereum. That is a massive market-making decision here. And they don't talk about this very important question. It just shows how broken the United States is. And it's really frustrating to hear, like MiCA, I was listening to your show earlier about, the MiCA implementation and hearing about June 30th and how there's been a bullwether here for probably stablecoins. And the United States just keeps dropping the ball, but a lot of that does come around to one individual, one man, and one mantra, and that has a really chilling effect.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of rulemaking, and then of course what this means on some of these fines, you've got Ripple versus the SEC, the May 6th reply. This could seal the fate, I think, obviously on institutional sales, but the big question is going to be what that fine is. I mean, some people looking at 100 million, obviously we know the proposal from the SEC. What are your thoughts? Where would it be good for the crypto industry as a whole? Where would that fine have to land to say, okay, that's a good win for crypto in general?
I used to be Ripple employees, and I used to work with Ripple. They're part of the Blockchain Association members. So my hope is they don't have any fine. But I personally am not a legal expert here, so I won't pontificate on like what the penalty should or shouldn't be. I do think that the CZ sentencing that has been met, especially here in DC, a little shocked because Binance has a really tarnished name here in DC, and they facilitated a lot of crime. And to get only 4 months, when SBF just recently got 25 years, again, mind you, very crimes. It's just really odd here. So a lot of folks are having different views on just kind of the sentencing and what's happening, with this, that, and the other with various crypto cases. But the last thing I'll say in terms of just these cases as a whole, they're really adding up. I mean, it's hard to keep track of just everything going on in mango markets recently. The Blockchain Association sued the SEC recently on the dealer rule. We have all these other groups from Texas, especially Blockchain Council, been doing some great work. So it's a lot, but at the same time, the industry's playing offense, and I think that's good to have. And Ripple, to their credit, was the first one to play offense and fight the SEC and show that it's possible. But I was talking to actually a Hill staffer yesterday about this. It's crazy how much money that these companies have to spend to defend themselves. And again, if Ripple does get a fine or not, but the amount of money, and again, we're talking in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions sometimes to defend themselves. That's what it takes to operate in the United States. And that's a really sad reality. And I think that if, Capitol Hill understood that a little more, I think it'd be, at least a wake up call to do something here, because the only folks getting a lot of money out of this is the lawyers. And we have some really great ones, but at the same time, it's crazy how that's the kind of cost of doing business. It's just how much legal battles you're going to fight here, whether justified or not, at the SEC.
Well, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, this is starting to line up very favorably for the EU, for Asia. We've started to see a lot of alignment down in South America. We're going to see movement, I think, in all sectors of the globe, it feels like, except for the United States, and in a very critical time around innovation. So hopefully, the lawmakers are going to get their head to really understanding this and see how this plays out. When you look at Gensler and just some of the timing that's happening this month, he's got this upcoming May 6th small business capital formation, the advisory committee. There's a whole slew of things that are happening in May for Gensler. Is there a strategy here that he normally tries to, preempt some of these things, especially if we start to see things around stablecoin or possibly the FIT bill coming to play? Do you think Gensler is going to be in a position where he's just trying to, continue to tally up pressure on the crypto community?
Definitely that. I think the one thing he's going to probably be focusing on, though, which will be probably coming down from Congress very shortly, maybe next week, depends what happens with the speaker, is SAB 121, Staff Council Bulletin 121. Everyone thinks in DC that crypto and the banks, we are against each other on the lobbying side. We're not. Actually, in this case especially, we work together on this one because the banks and crypto think it's pretty screwed up. You get to double count crypto on your balance sheet. And right now, the House, they went through a procedural motion called a Congressional Review Act, and it's right about to end. There's a whole congressional procedure and all this stuff. I won't get into it. But in short, basically, Mike Flood, Republican from Nebraska, as well as Wiley Nickel, a Democrat from North Carolina, introduced this resolution and it needs to get a vote in front of the House floor sometime in May. And again, it's one of those issues that crypto and the banks really care about. And we'll see how the vote does, but that has been a major priority we've seen for the SEC. And according to conversation I've had with folks on the Hill, also in the regulatory side, this is a personal priority for the chair. And it's what's keeping folks like BNY Mellon largely on the sideline when it comes to crypto, because these guys, like, when they can't get into that business line, when they have that to double count it. So this is going to be something that picks up. I think it's going to be something that he's going to be talking about a lot. We do have Senator Lummis leading the Senate version of that. So the question is there going to be enough of the Democratic groundswell? Because unlike traditional bills, we have to vote and try to put in packages. The Congressional Review Act, there's a whole timeline process, kind of like an impeachment of sorts. And so like this has to move. So if it dies along the way, in the Senate or in the House, it's done. But I think there's going to be a lot of talk on this and attempt to tell Democrats to not vote for this bipartisan provision. So keep an eye on SAP 120.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm looking at the MiCA timeline here, and I think about this, and I'm looking, everything's been going pretty much lockstep with what the anticipation was, moving out to June 2024, which is early entry into the application. We're going to see stablecoins in Europe. Surely Congress is watching this, and do they understand it, I guess is my question. Do they understand the impact that this is going to do for the EU getting ahead of the United States in innovation?
Those conversations have finally started to happen here in DC, and again, more on a macro level, just more the role of the U.S. dollar, also just the role of U.S. dollar dominance here. That conversation has finally started happening. I know the industry's been talking that for years now, but it's something that's kind of now gone to the mainstream here. We're talking to economists and folks who really do look at it not from a crypto lens, but more of a geopolitical lens. So we are starting to see that, but of course, usually those folks fall in the camp of the government, and those folks usually are also for things that, like Patrick McHenry, are red lines for. Like, hey, this is a major national security issue. The Fed should be the only one regulating stablecoins, and McHenry and others too will say, like, we actually think the state should have a role here. And that's where, that's kind of the situation we're probably likely in. Again, I'm not in these conversations, but this is probably what I imagine these are. But that's the truth, though. You're right. Like, the EU is moving. And when it comes to a thing like DeFi, they have a timeline. We will get to that at this point. Whereas sometimes in the United States, they try to do everything. They capture DeFi. And it's like, look, even EU has understood this is a separate beast. We're going to tackle this later on. And those conversations sometimes in DC just don't resonate, because what they hear is we're leaving something unregulated. And it's like, no, like, this is very small. Like, let's focus on getting major regulations in so we can work on the other issues. But as you can tell, we're a little slow here still in the United States.
Has there been any discussion, Hong Kong, of course, launches their ETFs, both on Bitcoin and Ethereum, in-kind redemption. That's a whole new cycle that even outpaces what we're doing with our own Bitcoin ETFs right now in Wall Street. Has there been any discussion about this? Because that too could also create more of an advantage for other countries around the ETF, which of course has been very successful here in the US. Any thoughts on that?
I do recall from some conversation with folks at Grayscale and other more on the lobbying side here that those conversations were happening at the SEC. Before the January conversations. A lot of the conversations obviously is on the ETH ETF. But when it comes to in-kind stuff, there was obviously a lot of pushback at every turn from the SEC. And I think at least from what I've gathered from talking to folks, they just want to get this product out and be the first one there. And so a lot of folks will, if the in-kind wasn't something that they were up to do, then they'll find a way to make it work. And so they did. But at the same time, I'm looking too optimistic here on the ETH side. And I don't think we're going to see too much optimism from the SEC on anything on the ETF front for quite some time.
Yeah, for sure. All right, a last clip I want to play a clip for you. This is Hester Peirce. She's talking about the topic of NFTs. I want to kind of dive into that real quick with you, but let me play this clip for you.
It would be an understatement to say that the NFT community is frustrated with the pace of coherent regulation for NFTs and how they fit within the securities laws. The impact theory and Stoner Cat's enforcement cases were particularly frustrating.
I had wanted, before these enforcement cases came out, to have the commission issue some guidance around NFTs, because it clearly hasn't prompted the SEC to come out with guidance.
Do you have any thoughts about the gaming world generally?
it's an area that we're going to learn a lot from to see how they're being used there. But I think that's going to push some of the boundaries for us, again, where we have to provide guidance.
And one last thing, you mentioned a distinction between maybe royalties going back to a company or royalties going back to a creator. Is that a distinction?
Well, I don't know that is necessarily a determinative factor in the securities analysis.
So as you can see, they seem a bit confused, and of course the two cases that's an attorney that's actually asking Hester some questions, and she's hitting on the two major categories of NFTs, which have mostly been about through celebrities. You had Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis with Stoner Cats, and then of course you had Impact Theory, which was he's a major YouTuber, both of which really just settled because they didn't want to have to go through the process of actually going to court. If it had went to court, probably a different story than what we are dealing with. So in essence, the SEC has just continued this overreach. What are your thoughts on this? Has Congress and has our lawmakers looked at this and said, man, this is just complete oppression on these innovators around, just creating, community projects, et cetera? I mean, this is just a couple of cases.
Yes, definitely. No, the NFT situation, Stoner Cats really, it was kind of the first time it was a wake-up call for a lot of folks. Earlier conversations around NFTs were mostly around NBA Top Shots, which also the SEC allegedly looked into, and they dropped that case apparently. So I think that's the first time we didn't see them go through with the case that was at least publicly known. So I thought that was interesting, kind of flew on the radar. But Stoner Cats really woke folks up. And I will say that there's a couple offices I've been talking to that are really interested in NFT legislation. I think we'll probably see something later on in the summer. Just at least from a high level, probably at least distinguishing them from securities laws here. But I don't see much pathway, at least right now, just given it's the end of the Congress nearly election year. But it is, at least in DC, they're starting to wake up to it here. But again, I want to take one more step back. I don't think we're done seeing the NFT cases. We've, like you mentioned, we saw, two big ones. We saw Bored Apes as well, a few, small ones here and there. But I don't think we're done with the SEC on that front yet. The NFT boom was just a couple years ago, and we saw, the ICO boom, that was a couple years later when the big court cases came to the SEC. But the last thing I want to highlight, we haven't really seen this side of the industry get hit yet. But I feel like, it's kind of like if it touches the sun, it's the SEC's jurisdiction when it comes to crypto, and it's gaming. We just haven't seen that happen yet. So, which is a good thing. I'm not encouraging the SEC by any means to go after gaming. It's a nascent industry, but this is just kind of the mantra where something new pops up. We just see the SEC saying that's my jurisdiction. And that's been really frustrating. Again, we saw that with stablecoins, and they got a lot of pushback in the early days, but they've still tried to hold that position for quite some time.
Ron, good to catch you. Thanks again for all the updates. We'll keep in touch as things start to transact through the summer months and getting into potentially the elections. I anticipate we'll probably see some more activity, at least with a direction, maybe not real action, but at least with some narrative as to where the markets from a legislative standpoint start to go. But thanks for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Anytime. And one last thing I'll say is watch the congressional races. Actually, I've talked about over 3 dozen members or candidates. Crypto is coming up. So I've seen that work on Capitol Hill. So stay tuned. The election is going to be interesting.
We're going to be talking about that quite a bit. Obviously, we're following our friend John Deaton and his race, along with others that are very pro-crypto. And then Coinbase has been doing a really good job at just keeping everybody kind of on top of what is happening in the legislative. And we tell people all the time, get out there in your communities and just ask the question, what's your stance? That's really the best thing. And a lot of times I think people are surprised when they start asking those questions. So, but it's the good thing is they're asking the questions. So that's the first step.
I've actually had 5 Democrats tell me that they've had that question asked them. So whoever's doing it, these are real people telling me this has happened to them. So and they were blind. So keep doing it. Whoever's out there, please do it.
Yeah, well, we're doing it a lot, so good stuff. Anyway, great to see you, and thanks again for stopping in.
Appreciate it. Thanks again, Paul.
You bet. All right, so you guys are not in the Diamond Circle. Make sure and get in right now. This is another place where we actually do updates on what's happening in not only the legislative topics, but also a lot of the races, some of the pro-crypto people, and I think also just pro-innovation in general around technology, because that's, of course, what our channel is really all about. If you're not in that, make sure and join. We'll leave a link down below. Of course, follow me on X, @PaulBarrett. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.